I'm very happy because I just got nervous that Tom is not arriving in time. So the next session will be moderated by Tom Flanagan. Here it is. And dear moderator, would you just introduce your panel for the next session? Tom Flanagan.
Good morning. Can I invite up Angela Duffy? Oh, you're all here in the front row. That's terrific. Angela, come on up stage, all of you. That'd be great. So we have Angela Duffy from NDRC. We have Tony Hickson, formerly of Imperial, but now of the cancer research in the UK. Stefan Hess from ETH, and Niall Shanley from Telefonica. So we have the combination of industry perspective and university perspective, an accelerator perspective in between university and an accelerator. I'm Tom Flanagan. I'm the director for Nova UCD. UCD is the largest university here in Ireland. So we are partnered as well with Trinity, where you've been already on a venture fund, and there'll be a discussion of the venture fund proposition this afternoon. But we also have an accelerator program, and just yesterday I launched an accelerator program together with Vodafone and Ericsson around 5G, and we're bringing together a group of companies supporting them as they develop their propositions. We also, of course, take all the spin-outs from the university and grow them as well. So I'm hugely interested in this topic. I'm delighted to have the speakers that we have here this morning. This should be a very interactive session. Feel free. We do have microphones at the back ready to come up. If you raise your hand, you can interrupt at any point. Not now, but later you can interrupt. And ask the questions that are burning for you. Because this is a new area, I think, in some cases, where universities look at accelerators as being the vehicle and incubators as being the vehicle for progressing technology transfer. So it's a great opportunity. So with that, I'll ask you each to introduce yourselves and the area that you've got. So Angela.
Check that we're switched on.
I think you're switched on. Is she switched on?
No.
The audience says no.
No, I can't hear me either. How about now? No. I'm attacked.
Guys are working.
No.
You're on now. Give it a try.
We'll give it a try. That's working?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll need it because I'm soft-spoken. There we go. So it's really interesting to be here. And actually with this panel, we had breakfast this morning thanks to Tom's organization. And like many of the panelists, I come from a diverse background. So I'd been in the research sector in academia for a number of years, and then collaborated out with industry. Then I went to the corporate world and collaborated back in. So there's a lot of knowledge transfer. Everything from collaborative agreements and patents across the board there. And now actually I work in an accelerator, so working with startups that are cooperating both with the university sector and with businesses, corporates, large and small. So it's interesting. I think I've probably covered a breadth of many things, but so have the rest of the panelists. So I think it'll be a fruitful discussion.
Great, thanks. Tony?
All right, can you hear me?
Is Tony switched on?
So Tony Hickson, Chief Business Officer at Cancer Research UK. I lead their commercialization functions for the charity. My background is about 15 years in industry, so in the pharmaceutical industry, biotech, and a startup along the journey. And then for the previous 15 years after that, I was at Imperial College London, where I ran Imperial Innovations. And we had a great time there. We set up 4 different accelerators, 2 incubators, and had a number of relationships with companies like BP and Shell and J&J on different types of programs. But yeah, about 9 months ago, I moved on to Cancer Research UK, who actually commercialise intellectual property. Many people think of them solely as a charity, but actually they fund £500 million worth of research across the UK and commercialise the IP that arises out of that. And we are just about to embark on a program of setting up a number and partnering with a number of accelerators across the UK in the cancer area.
Very good, thanks. Niall?
Just on it is, yeah. My name is Niall Shanley. I am Wyra UK and Ireland's legal counsel. Wyra is basically Telefonica's innovation section. It organises and has accelerators in 11 jurisdictions and a number, maybe 6 or 7 in the UK alone. So my background was that I was an IT professional and started my own business, and then I went back, studied as a lawyer, and went in-house now as their counsel and look over the investment portfolio in regards to the negotiations and everything got to do with it, but also work directly in regard to how things run in the place. So that's me.
Very good.
Yeah, Stefan Hess. I'm coming from Switzerland, and I'm a technology manager. I will have about 20 years career in technology, research and development. And then about the end of the 2005, 2010, I started acting with ETH as a coach, as a startup. Even today, I'm an entrepreneur. We also founded Accelerators, etc. And I would like to take the role of a corporate here. Like how corporate act in startups.
Let's start with that first topic, which is really around why do corporates get involved with universities in acceleration? What's in it for a corporate? What's the ambitions? Niall, if you...
From our perspective, Telefonica was looking at what was going on in the world. So we're a telecommunications company. The days of phone calls and text messages were beginning to decline. Everybody was looking at WhatsApp and different forms of communication involving digital means. So we looked at what is the next wave, where is the future, and we said we needed to innovate. And the current CEO of Telefonica is actually the founder of the idea of Wire, which is our investment and innovation vehicle. And with that, he started a base with some of his colleagues, and that spread into 11 jurisdictions. So for us, primarily, it is about innovation. It's about making sure Telefonica is ahead and knowing what's coming down the path as well. But equally, with such a large company, we have a large footprint across the globe. We want to make sure that at all times we are running at the most efficient that we can. I'm not saying we are, but I'm saying that we're striving to be. And that's important if you approach things that way.
And you also have a connection with the University of Edinburgh, so you have...
Yeah, so originally the concept for Accelerator that we had was about very early seed and directly relevant to telecommunications. We recognized that there was a bigger concept around there that would have cross applicability. So cybersecurity works not only in telco but in every other vertical as well. It's a relevant field. So we did strategic partnerships with not only commercial operators but in turn with an academic institution, the University of Edinburgh, which is also in partnership and funded by Scottish Enterprise. And we opened up an AI blockchain innovation hub in the University of Edinburgh last year, at the end of last year, around November. So that has been learning, and we've been working very well. The guys are brilliant, and they have a tremendous appetite to help facilitate the links between corporate and educational institutions. And I think that's the right approach, and it's just striking the balance effectively that everybody's meeting what their intentions are.
Very good. And Stefan, your perspective on corporates and what's in it for corporates to get involved with universities?
One of the most important things is what Neil said, is big corporations come under stress when they have to innovate, radically innovate. When the trend is too fast, the changes are too fast, they are made for big product-to-market organizations. And when they come under stress, they're looking for opportunities to bring in, at least today, they look for opportunities to bring in new innovation, and startups are such a vehicle. And so one startup and one big corporate won't work. Therefore, accelerators find a nice space for helping here.
Yeah, but it's an interesting
marketplace from my point of view.
It's an interesting mix, though, because corporates, the big thing about a corporate is they want to be innovative, but they also want to minimize risk. Whereas the startup and the entrepreneurs are all about risk.
It's all about risk.
So
you grow the risk in a secure small vehicle with a lot of agility and a potential to adapt to new situations, which come with all technologies, all new markets. These risks are inherently.
Yeah.
So we can consider startups, from my view, we can consider startup risk adherent in this early phase of technology development and marketing.
And Angela, what corporates are connected with NDRC and what's in it for them?
Yeah, so I suppose predominantly the corporates that are engaged are potential customers or co-development partners with the startups. So the startups need their customers, and NDRC's main objective is to ensure that the startup is on the right path. And that means going out to understand the other side's perspectives and needs. And then we really force them to ensure that they are engaging customers that will have an appetite for what they're developing. So a lot of the engagement is co-development. So we have Equi-Ratings working with SAP, we have WIA, and we have Horus in IoT working with Vodafone. So together they co-develop, and then at the end of that, there's a long relationship, so it's much easier then for them to sell and to be successful. We also have sponsorship, we have credits that are given from Amazon, so there's quite a lot of ways that the corporates engage with the startups, but it's very important that the startups commence with the corporates' understanding in mind and their needs in mind.
Good. And Tony, when you think about the corporates and you're attracting corporates in to work with your propositions going forward, how do you sell into them? What is it that they need?
Well, I mean, they're obviously looking for horizon scanning, so they want to avoid an extinction event for their future, and they're looking to acquire talent. Many of the companies that we interact with, those sort of things, ultimately are looking to pick up some of the people, particularly in the software area. But I think it's interesting to contrast the university's motivations for setting up accelerators, which aren't always the same. Mm-hmm. So universities are motivated by demand from the student and the postdoc type community for this. There's a big demand for this now from those people who are now paying a lot of money to go to university. There is the motivation for impact. So there'd be, a lot of push now from government for universities to demonstrate impact, and accelerators are a great way of moving ideas forward out of the university labs. And then perhaps the last one is the sort of culture change. And certainly now I'm in CI UK, that's of great interest to us because many of our academics don't necessarily have an entrepreneurial culture in them, and also 95% of PhD students will not go on to be academics in the future. So universities are looking to arm them with skills that are going to help them go forward, and also for that 5% that do become academics, that they don't see any exclusivity between being a good academic and being entrepreneurial and having a startup. So that culture change thing is becoming increasingly important for a reason universities do it. And what we need to do is try and align those university goals with those of our corporate partners.
So when you go out to pitch to corporates, when you select the corporates and you pitch to them to become part of it, what are the aspects that you put forward and attract them?
Well, I mean, what would I say? I think it's very dangerous for a university to have a single bilateral relationship with one industry partner because it's hard to have the deal flow, and certainly our experience at the university was that there's a low conversion rate of the ideas that come out of the university and go into corporate accelerators. Not many of them actually achieve the dream of being integrated into a commercial product within that corporate environment. It's very hard to make that conversion happen in reality, and we're better off accepting that. So what actually seems to be happening a lot is that universities set up accelerator type models, and then they bring in a number of different corporate partners to come in and help sponsor it, that are interested in their certain verticals. And that way the accelerator is sustainable and has its own identity. It's not beholden to any one corporate partner.
And from the university perspective, or from your own perspective, what level of person in the organization should you try to get involved in launching an accelerator?
We had a really interesting discussion about this earlier. So, I mean, the model that you're talking about is probably partnership with innovation and people that have a budget that's assigned to manage innovation and look outwards maybe for that. What we would find is that our startups potentially don't need to engage with those people. That's a piece of money that's set aside in order for a corporate or a business to explore. What we really need is for an engagement at a level where there's a decision maker and that they already have a strategic focus, they already have a need in terms of a project or in terms of a business need that the startup can fulfill. So some of the engagement with the innovation groups and hubs within the corporates is good. I think that's more for a cultural and just corporate social responsibility and some of those pieces, and I think it's warranted. I think if you're a business, a small business, a startup wanting to sell or wanting to be successful and get embedded with a corporate, you need to be talking with people in business units that are making decisions around the area that you're working on.
Can I just go across the panel then in terms of what are the success stories that you have.
Can I say something on that on top?
Oh, yeah, of course.
I mean,
yeah.
if you go, you
Yeah.
ask for pitching, the first thing you have to pitch to somebody who has the overview in the huge corporation, which is usually a high level, higher product management, higher CTOs people, maybe the innovation manager, I don't know. But these guys are pretty busy people, so you have to pitch fast and you have to have a topic. And the reason is usually a trend. Don't go pitching to somebody who is not listening to you because they're not interested. And the trend, for example, today would be, let's say, digital. So you pitch, you explain, and then you try that. This guy says, okay, there's a technology and there is an interest. And I very often, universities don't pitch that way. Mm-hmm. They pitch a little bit academic. And that makes it for industrial people difficult to really follow what are they pitching? Are they pitching research? Are they pitching startups? That makes it difficult.
So Tony, in the pharma area, you've attracted big names to work with you. Talk about that a little bit. Tell us the experience getting them involved. And
Yeah, I think it's a recognition that many accelerators, when we talk about accelerators, are they're sort of software driven. They're product driven. They can move very quickly, have quick cycle times, relatively small amounts of money, don't need dedicated specialist facilities, and you can get a lot of deal flow moving through them very quickly. And they're very successful at doing that. They work really well and they engage the community great. But if you're in somewhere like perhaps automotive or the pharmaceutical industry where you have very long cycle times, very large amounts of money required to get it to market, those accelerator models are quite hard to work in that traditional cohort type model. So we've been experimenting, and some other universities have experimented with different models. And one we did was something called Apollo, which is a sort of pseudo-accelerator model where it's a £40 million fund, but it involves 3 universities. And the reason it involves 3 is to get sufficient critical mass. So that was Imperial, UCL, and Cambridge. And it involves 3 pharma companies, Johnson & Johnson, GSK, and AstraZeneca. And they came together to try and move projects out of the academic lab and move them forward. But it's not just money, it's not just a fund, it's about bringing that expertise from those pharmaceutical companies to bear on the academic ideas, to help triage them, but crucially to help move them forward, to provide access to the corporate facilities and their drug libraries and all that sort of thing. So it is more accelerator-like, and it's moving forward. It has about 20 projects now, and it's moving them all forward, but with sufficient capital and with sufficient expertise to increase their chances of success and to accelerate them.
So one of the things that I've heard is that, like the accelerator, the Y Combinator, and those kind of accelerators have been around for a long time, and the idea of working on a short kind of period, 6 weeks, 12 weeks, and then all focused on the pitch session at the end. And they pitch and they still don't get the investment. It takes longer to actually get the investment and so on. Is it time to move on from that? Is that an old model? No.
Yeah, I think it's important to recognize a couple of things that are relevant questions or relevant parts of this whole discussion. First one is relevant to what stage that company is at. So are they just straight off the plans? Are they minimum viable product? Are they ready to scale? And who is the team that's in there? These are all important factors got to do with the delivery of an accelerator, and what is the key, intention between the parties who are partners who are delivering the accelerator. For example, from my perspective and my read of universities, they want to make sure that their student and the area surrounding universities get to maximize their opportunity, get the skills that they require on top, and get the best introductions, as you were saying, to the direct people that are in the right point of view that can make executive decisions about adopting them or not. In regards to the corporate side, we're looking from Telefonica and from a number of other corporates that I know are looking at the actual innovation rather than the investment side of it. If you're talking about a VC or an angel, they're looking at the investment side and return on investment, whereas we're looking at the innovation. These are all very important factors. And when we accelerate, we did a lot of learning. We're going for 2011, 2012 was the original start of it all. And for UK, I think 2014, I'm just trying to remember the dates, maybe a little bit earlier than that. But what had started off as early stage, which was the early stage startup coming in the door off the plans or with just an MVP, and we would go in, okay, now we'll get you pitch practice, we will get you this, we will get you that, we will get you this, and everybody will do each one of them in turn over a 9-month period. That doesn't work anymore when you look at a company that's a little bit further down the path. who have the MVP and they're looking to scale. They're looking for the clients. So what they're interested in is, this is my weakness. This is the areas that I need help in. And if it's an early stage company with a partnership with an institution, an academic institution, then we look at what the weaknesses, or not weakness is the wrong word, but where they need help, that they may not have the experience and they need that little bit of help to get back to a level where they feel on a level par that they can negotiate properly for scaling. For us, we identified that we had to learn. We learned that, there's no point in sending a company straight in front of a panel who's a subcommittee of a subcommittee on some corporate ranch miles from the decision-making person who's living somewhere else. What you normally find is you'll have a gateway panel and then you'll have the executive decider above that. And the gateway panel will act as, is this company somebody who I think, yeah, I want my boss to sign off and write this. And they're putting their personal stake in. And once you have that personal stake buy-in, then that's the value for a company who's ready to scale, because they need a proof of concept or a revenue generating trial or a contract, an actual contract, because they will say, here's my proof, I can do this, my product's ready, it's fit to hit the market, and we've got this company here, so that should give you comfort that you're not the first one and it's not going to fall apart the minute you put it into your system. For the linking in with academia, I think a lot of the time, not always, because sometimes there's incredible, genius that will not only be genius in regards to the creation of the product and the whole founding and the incredible innovation, but also a commercialization genius that's working together. And that's not always there, as was identified here on the panel there a minute ago. So that's where what do they need? Where are they at? And how do you link them properly with the right people? And if that's through corporate companies or the corporate company's strategic partners or the institution's strategic partners, or something we spoke about earlier where I said maybe alumni that come through the universities or alumni who have been linked with the university over the years, they will be a naturally synergist point to work, because they'll be in corporates a lot of the time, to get the foot in the door. And they may be at quite a senior level because they have gone through academia and earned their stripes not only academically, but also on a professional basis. So these all contribute to the concept of what is the traditional model of the accelerator. It's moving on from the original basic idea of just a simple rollout of a plan and everybody's here at 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock you're here, to 12 o'clock you're here. It now has to be bespoke. It has to be looked at, and you reduce the numbers. Another thing is it going to be 20 places? No, it's not. There's no set defined places for us anyway. We'll always say, if it's right, it's right. If we believe there's an appetite, we'll take them in.
Very good. And Angela, your experience?
Yeah, so NDRC's set up about 11 years now. It was a corporate or government initiative here, and it was with the universities, including UCD. It has evolved immensely over that time. So really in the beginning, its mandate was to help commercialize the research from industry, or from getting everything mixed up, the universities. And it did. And then over time, we saw more and more people that were non-university based coming in. We saw startups that were based on business model as well as tech. And yes, we had days where we would have investors come in and it was a pitch day, and we're moving away from that again. We have lesser numbers. We have 2 different programs now, some for earlier stage, some for later stage companies, to your point. And so it's really varied. Each company, the other thing to think about is that each company is very different. So it's not a school-based, classroom-based learning system. It's a very much mentoring one-to-one. And Tom, you mentioned this. So it isn't just for, a 3 months or 6 month program. It's forever. My portfolio of companies is 25 or thereabouts, and they're spread all over Ireland, and actually programs beyond Ireland. So, we are much broader and look very different than we did before, and the approaches that we take are different. But it's very much individualized, it's customized, and it's looking at the gaps that companies might have and trying to fill that in whatever manner you can. So definitely, it's an evolution, as is with yourselves and everything.
I'm going to open it up to questions. Feel free to raise your hand. Questions already. Get a microphone up here. Who's got my friend? In the front 2 rows. And the next question after that will be way at the back. I'm kidding. No. First 2 questions.
One aspect of corporate motivation that hasn't been mentioned is recruitment and retention. And I think at Oxford we see increased evidence that corporates are wanting to engage with our incubators, accelerators, not so much to access new technologies, which they might do, and that will be a upside, but actually to offer their staff something different and an experience which is often very different to that in the big kind of corporate machinery. And if that allows them to retain staff for a few years longer, that can economically make a lot of sense for them. I mean, is that something that resonates, that you see evidence of?
I think that was something that you spoke about earlier, Niall, where and actually Tony as well, about taking people and giving them almost the training in the opposite direction. So taking them into a fast-paced, flexible environment and absorbing how a startup works. And it's very much about, well, it's a test and see. So you build something, you go out, you test it, and that model of people call it design thinking, which seems to be a wave now, which I would have done about 10 years ago, but that customer centricity of design and flexibility. So I think there is evidence that people need that training in order to augment innovation, as you say.
I was thinking a couple of years ago about the war of talents. It could be a good entry gate for a corporate to get talents. I doubt it today. Whenever I saw a successful startup with good people, these guys are then at some point entrepreneurs, and they don't want to work in a corporate environment anymore. So you can get them with a good contract after you have bought, for example, this startup, but that you really believe that corporates get the talents via startups, I doubt it. And when they keep them in the portfolio and so on, then they are fine.
And to be clear, I don't think it's necessarily acquiring the talent in the startup, although it could be. It's the staff who are already in the big corporate and giving them exposure to a different way of thinking, a different perspective, and keep them in the company.
You mentioned a very valid point. So, I mean, I come from the academic world, and when I realized I don't really want to stay in that side of things in research, what was I going to do? And so as you're a postgrad and as you're a postdoc and as you're, funneled and thinking about the research, you lift your head up and you say, what other options do I have? So I think there's also responsibility and a need out there for people who are on that path in universities to have options. So we're very much engaging with the universities, and we do a lot of work out there to try and plant an entrepreneurial seed. It's not for everybody, but at that level in the universities, for people to understand that, I could think about commercializing this. They don't have to. It's just that this is an option, and we're rolling out some kind of one-to-ones and some training around that, and we have programs, we call them pre-commercialization programs, that we roll out to sort of expose people in the postdoc and postgrad world to this as an option for them, as a career option. But also there's a potential for them to actually take what they have and to bring it to commercialization. So I think that's a very important seed to plant, and maybe that's where you develop talent as well that's applicable out there.
But Tony, would you have had corporates that would have put some of their people in to be in the ecosystem?
Yeah, I think there's two different things on Adam's point. One is exposing people that are in corporates to early stage startup, vibrant sort of people wanting to do stuff. And that tends to be through mentorship, from what we see most of all. So corporates lend people who can be fantastic mentors to some of our new teams coming through. But then there's also corporate spin-outs, which are slightly different. So that the corporates sometimes struggle, they can quash innovation within themselves. And if they don't allow startups, if they try and cultivate startups within their own environment, they tend not to thrive. So there have been some situations where those spin-outs have actually done better by coming out of the organization. Sometimes when the companies are shutting down a whole site, you see this happen a lot, and they come out of that corporate environment, team up with the local university accelerator or incubator, and tend to thrive because they're outside that corporate environment, but they have all that fantastic skill base and expertise that they acquired from the corporate when they came out.
Yeah, very good. Amanda, did you have a question? Oh, sorry, Henrik.
Thank you. I'm Henrik Rudin. You might remember I used to be the president of this organization.
Past president. There's nothing like a past president.
So, being a bit provocative intentionally, so no offense, I hope. We have universities here, large organizations that are built to resist change. And then we have huge corporates, large organizations that are also built to resist change. I'm missing the SMEs, the guys that have customers are active on the market that live of sales, yet only have maybe 100 employees. How do you incorporate that in this model? Because I think they're much more prone to change and much more agile than the corporates. They have good ideas, but it's more or less impossible for them to talk to universities.
Great question.
But particularly, they have another attitude. They are serious entrepreneurs. In corporates, you meet managers, but an entrepreneur is somebody who's used to found companies and make them successful. And that is what made basically all SMEs have shown. I have very, very good experience with SME startup corporations.
Yeah, so from the perspective of the startups that I would work with, it's much easier for them to engage with SMEs. So the barrier to get into the 3 and 4 people up is not there. So they are able to go in at the top level and engage. There's a pro and con. The price sensitivity is different, the relationship is different. But a lot of our startups, our discussion was geared towards corporates, but a lot of our startups would have SMEs as people that would also be their customers. But that's a different model. So they do have to look at the cost. The cost of customer acquisition might be lower. So you may have some lead conversion that's higher when you talk to them. But it is a different model then in terms of what the payment looks like and what you're looking at in terms of your margins. So it kind of comes down to unit economics as well. It is easier, and a lot of people will start, and the startups will go that route because it's a very long sales cycle with a corporate, and the relationship has to be built over time, and it has to be with the right people over time. So there are definitely, I don't know, hazard a guess, but it's definitely at a 50-50 where there's engagement. Our conversation was steered towards corporates, but that's the reality of it.
Yeah. If you want to, can you give you a real example from the last 2 weeks ago? I was in an alliance negotiation at a very critical point with a young ETH startup. And there was a big corporate with a couple of billion euro at the table with all this management, and a small entrepreneurial company with the owner, a lady, and she has about a couple of hundred, let's say 100 million euro value. We were in this negotiation. And during this negotiation was the point where we have presented us, I don't know, my startup, but I was the alliance manager. We presented it, and then it was a point to fund, I think it was a couple of million euro. And this lady just said, I will do it. We decided we will do it. The corporates, from the big corporate, they sit there, they didn't know what to say. They were, they wanted to negotiate completely different. So we went back, and then the corporate came back and said, okay, we want to participate. Now the lady said, no, I don't want you to participate anymore. I think we want to do it alone, at least in the first phase. So these are real examples, and I can tell you from the SMEs are very powerful, but they are very fast. There is not a lot of, they don't go very long. So you cannot, probably not go for 10 years with a small SME. They will jump off after a couple of years.
Can I ask sorry?
Fast investment, see if it works, and then they go out.
Niall, I was going to say, for your environment with Telefonica and Wira, surely it wouldn't have all been just startups. Surely you would have found some people that already have an SME, they already are delivering product and service, and this is some new technology, is a new business case for them rather than a new business plan.
Yeah, it kind of, like, you're 100% on the money in regards to SMEs. They are really early adopters of technology, 9 times out of 10. But it's about the flow back to the startup, or I don't want to use startup, the company that's in its early to medium stage. And because for us, Tom, we went from predominantly investing in very early stage MVP or beforehand to medium-sized company in our latest cohort. We've a smaller number than we've ever taken in a number of companies, but their value is significantly higher. We're looking at maybe an 18 million value or something along that. And because they are ready to scale within a large corporation, and as such, they have gone through the process of working with the SMEs to get the foothold and working up through it. Now, the speed of that change is, put your finger in the air and decide which way the wind is going, because it's relative to each company in their own subjective time frame and the relevance to the product. But there is an element of bigger contracts, 9 times out of 10 with the larger company corporates, And that's why it takes a little bit, whether it's through procurement, as we all love, or whatever else that takes a while to get in the door. So for immediate revenue, deal flow, a lot of the times the SMEs make sense because you're covering your costs of going and keeping things going. And you also have a much more personal relationship 9 times out of 10 with the SMEs. For our purposes, we have a number of early stage investments, and they're not always investments, by the way. It's like, so for the likes of University of Edinburgh, well, actually, the only place that we do invest in is in the London area. For University of Edinburgh thing, that was actually state-sponsored, where they're given a stipend, and we don't invest in them. We just provide all the services, and we say, when you're ready, we'd love to talk. So it gives them an opportunity, because there has to be a clear right intention, and you can't be aggressive, because you could, and it's maybe a bit of brand protection, but it's also a little bit of cultural, democratize entrepreneurship. We've all heard that phrase. But you can't be aggressive in your intention in dealing with early stage company founders and companies, because it just doesn't work. You just set off on the wrong foothold.
Tony, did you?
Yeah, well, just I think the problem with SMEs is that our early stage startups coming through these accelerators would love to engage with SMEs. They can't find them. The issue is matching up with them. And where I've seen this work really well is the customer discovery journey type accelerator part. So this is different to Lean Canvas, where halfway through the journey, you have to go out and talk to 100 customers. If you don't talk to 100 customers, you're kicked off the course type thing. And that works very well in business to consumer type environments, internet, websites, all that. But it doesn't work if you're trying to develop a new drug or a super high-tech medical device or something like that. So the customer discovery journey, and these are iCore in the US, iCure in the UK, Imperial did one called Accelerate. They buy out a postdoc or someone, an early career researcher's time for 3 months, and they send them out there, and their job is to engage with potential customers. And those customers, a lot of them are SMEs, because they have the time to go out there and seek them out. And it's quite an amazing experience. One of the most powerful things I've seen in the accelerator model, in that almost invariably those early career researchers come back and they pivot. They come back with a different product proposition, having really gone out there and tested the market. So I think that's a good way to get SMEs involved in this.
Yeah. I asked earlier about success stories. Any questions? Raise your hand if you have a question. Success stories. In terms of, it was interesting for both Tony and for Niall, the journey from kind of coming on an accelerator program through being introduced to finding a champion within a corporate, to finding your way into the right timing, get into the VC, or become a partner. And becoming a partner, there's different levels of partnership and so on. Do you want to comment on that, the approach?
If I may, just on the adoption into corporate, we lesson learned from us was that we needed a champion, as you said, to champion these companies when they are pitching internally to our own different group structure, or externally to strategic partners.
So who does that champion be, actually? Is it?
Well, we set up a team specifically tasked to do it. Okay. So like for the UK market, there's an O2 engagement team, because Telefonica owns O2 in the UK. And for the global market, we have 2 specific people tasked with dealing directly with the global team, who in turn will push it out as well across the different sectors, because we've also got a market in South America. And this is about making sure that you have these people with their relevant KPIs matching, that they must get success for these companies in integrating them in some way, shape, or form. Don't get me wrong, like, not every company is going to do well in, a startup and getting through into the corporate. That's why the numbers have been reduced for us as well, because I think filling 20 places and expecting every one of them to get a huge contract out of us is unrealistic and unfair. So by having these champions, these engagement people working with us as part of our team, they can identify, is there an appetite? Is there an appetite internally for it? Who's the right person they have to be in front of? And then they can go and kick the door down with the startup and the company to make sure they're in front of them and get an actual decision real time back to them.
What's the typical pathway, though? Do they have to meet the venture fund aspect and be invested in before they become partners, or do they become partners first and gradually grow in the partnership arrangement?
Well, for us, we set up 2 types of relationship with the startups, the early stage companies. One was through an investment where we'd stick, traditionally it used to be 68k in value into them on whatever their value was in a type of a loan note, and then we'd get shares, we'd convert when they get a next investment at a certain percentage, whatever the value is. And that would in turn give them a lot of, we would be able to give them incentives by not having the cost that a usual company non-Wire would have to get into the group. That would be immediately we're invested, mutuality of interest, and then secondly, we can put them in front of the right people because they're, if you like, a Wire company, they're part of the Telefonica brand. Maximum we ever take is up to 10%, so we're not trying to take their IP off them. It's their IP, it's their company. We're minority shareholders. We're interested in innovation. The second method that we do is in the satellite locations outside of our London base, if you like, in the UK. And that's where we say, right, well, we'll give you all the acceleration you want and for 6 months or 9 months, depending on the location. And we'll work with our strategic partners. And we'll just say the next time you're taking a round, whatever the deal you're given to a third-party objective investor, we want the opportunity to do that too, up to our maximum, of course. So it's about light touch. And getting them into the company, the pathway, once they're engaged as part of either A or B in them two scenarios, we get immediately onto our engagement team and we say, you know, now we've already vetted them with the engagement team, but we say, who's the right people? Get them in. Or we might have even had the right people in when they were doing the pitch to become part of the Wire thing, which has become more prevalent now. It's a learning curve. And the reality is we won't have the immediate perfect plan now, but we are open to change. We're open to improving. And that's the key, because there's no way in hell we're going to know the exact route.
Very good. Any questions from the audience? Yes?
Well, I have a question regarding the pitching itself. So right now you're talking a lot about technology pitch, how to talk to corporates. What are you pitching, by the way? Are you pitching a technology as such? Well, you can't pitch an innovation because the innovation is not in the market. Or do you pitch a package? I just refer to the impact on society. And how do you check that beforehand? So is there a possibility checking a technology, for example, working with social sciences beforehand, engaging a total different faculty from your university, getting a total different package offered to corporate as well as SMEs?
Yeah, from our perspective, when people come in and say, we have a general call and then we might have, like in Milton Keynes, we've got an intelligent mobility centre where we've partnered up with people in the transport industries. So Transport System Catapult, Network Rail, Stagecoach, these likes of these companies who are experts in their field, they know what's going on in them areas. And we'll have them experts, and we might have internal experts from our own company as well, sitting on the panel, who will be asking the salient questions. If it was a case of an investment, we'll do a medium-sized deep due diligence perspective on them and check out, you know, what's going on. We will check with our technology people as well. Is this something that's realistically, you know, accurate? It's not, you know, fool's gold being sold and wrapped in bubble wrap. You know, it's not a scenario like that. You have to, but there is a high element of risk. And we spoke about this earlier when we were having breakfast. I'm sorry bringing up conversations we weren't party to, but what's the motivation that's triggering the corporate to do this? Is it that they have identified something that they need to fix or do better? Or is it a case of they know there's innovation out there, they might not have thought of it, but they see it and they go, oh, this would fit here and work really well. And that you have to balance. I don't think we're nailed down to one or the other for us. And that's why having the right people in the room who know this in their area right, and for the academia as well, having your right people in the room, that's important too, because you can test and say, this smells a bit off. You know, that's just green screen being packaged as blockchain. You know, it's not good. So for me, that's how we've kind of got around that. But we do have to evolve. And if it's something significantly technologically evolved, then we'd get experts from outside as well and say, can you show them your code? Or we might even contact an existing customer and say, is this actually working? Tell us, does it do this? and we'll get permission from the company to say, yeah, we can do that. We wouldn't go behind them or anything.
Tony, do you want to say something?
Yeah, just to follow up on that point, certainly we've tried both tech-led and challenge-led approaches in our accelerators, and the tech-led ones are pretty standard. You know, they work. The people have an idea, they assemble a team, they go through the sort of lean canvas type process to get there. The challenge-led is more challenging. It's more difficult to do. We found that, and part of the reason is it superficially sounds very attractive. You get the corporates to say what they want, the problems they need to solve, and nothing academics like better is to go after a challenge. The problem is framing the questions. Is often the questions either are massively wide because the corporate is horizon scanning for stuff outside of its immediate business area, which makes it very hard to lock on to a problem to solve, or it's so narrow that it's better suited to a consultancy project to actually come up with a particular solution to that corporate's particular problem it's trying to solve. So maybe we're just not getting it right yet, but we've struggled to get that challenge model nailed so far.
And sorry, just before, just talk something when you're talking there, it may be the case that your internal organization is looking at 3 steps down the point of innovation. When somebody walks in the door and they might be exceptional and they might be 8 steps down and you may not have even thought of it. So there's a real, there's a conundrum there, but at least if you have the right people in the room with as much knowledge that's available at that moment in time, you can make an informed decision.
Very good.
Just one comment on it is, you should be selling capability, whether that's personnel, knowledge, or the technology. It's a package. I would respond in terms of it's a capability. So maybe there's a simulation into a corporate, but what they started out with as a startup may not end up what's being used out there, but the approach that they can take and their own competencies and maybe their know-how is what they are packaging together, I would say.
Very good. Yeah. Any other questions?
Yeah, can I answer that on top?
Sorry.
I think what you also need to communicate to a corporate is trust. It's we have used the word pitching in corporates don't pitch. Pitching is usually for investors. I mean, and a corporate looks for alliances. He wants, if he really is interested in the technology, and then he needs people who are ready for alliances. Investors looking for people who are ready to make a fast revenue in a couple of whatever. And so you have to communicate trust, you have to communicate readiness for alliance. That's a different pitch, actually.
So I'll go to David next. That's okay?
Thank you. Just wondering about the accelerator model itself in terms of profitability. Are you all profit centers, cost centers, and do you have a view on how universities should structure and fund accelerators within the ecosystem?
That's probably a good one for you, Tony, since you've had the experience.
So a lot of the accelerators that we've got involved with before have used government funding to get them off the ground. Either universities' own resources. You do need leadership, just like the corporates need that C-suite commitment to run an accelerator. The universities need the same leadership buy-in if you're really going to make this work. So therefore, you can normally get some money from the university and maybe some from a government grant or something like that to kick it off. And then typically we have brought in the corporates after that to come in with their verticals and to act as sponsors. We haven't relied on the corporates to help us set it up from scratch. Then in terms of the business model, our experience, everyone has a different experience on this. Our experience was we did experiment initially with equity, taking a bit of equity. And what we found, certainly with student basics, right at the very beginning, the earliest layer of accelerator, that taking equity, even a tiny amount, even 2 or 3%, would actually put off a lot of people from engaging with us. I think it's different once you enter that scale-up phase. So we actually dispensed with taking equity and accepted that this was a model we had to continually support, but it was a good thing because we were changing that culture and doing good things.
Thanks. Heinrich? Oh, actually, while you're there, can we get your question over here first?
Yes, thank you very much. I had a technology transfer office, and I was wondering how are the best practices in terms of relationship between the accelerator and the technology transfer office. In Geneva, we have a new accelerators popping up. They do a lot of scouting, but they don't really involve the technology transfer office when they start discussing with the researchers. At which point do you think the best practices are in the term of collaborating with the technology transfer office working on cases that are submitted to your accelerators? Thank you.
Angela?
Yeah, so I suppose, we were born out of collaboration with the university, so we would engage as best we can, reach out to, Tom and others in UCD and TCD and all of the universities here. So I see people in the room that I know. Ian is sitting down there, Kieran is sitting from Galway. There's loads of people that, are our points of contact, and I think it's very important to engage with the TTO offices. So they are aware of the research inside. I think it's important for us to reach into, the principal investigators again, more around, what opportunities lie with, their students and with the people that they're working with, and, some of the research, can we enable that to come out, and can we enable them to have a pathway out as well? So for us, for NDRC, it's very important to engage with the tech transfer offices, and it's important to engage with PIs and the people creating opportunities as we would see it. So that's, our approach to it, really.
Very good. Heinrich, any other questions as well?
Looking into the future has always interested me. So 20 years from now, what is the model? Will all universities have accelerators, incubators, and all the corporates, maybe even SMEs, be engaged in such activities? Or will we have seen entire different landscape? And if you say, yes, we're here to stay, then you have to tell me why, and why you wouldn't be innovative and develop.
Great question. Who'd like to tackle that?
It's extremely foolish to predict anything 20 years out. So I would have worked in corporate organizations, and mapping even your finances beyond 5 years, or even at 5 years, is nonsense. So we wouldn't be able to predict that. We certainly can say that it will evolve. I think that, what I see in terms of maybe trends, and Stefan said to me, oh my goodness, look at Dublin, look at what happened, where did this kind of tech city come from? And it has come over the last 10 years. I don't think we would have been able to foresee what is done at our Silicon Docks whatsoever. So for me, 20 years is way too far out to predict.
Tony?
Well, I think so. I agree. But what we have seen, which is encouraging, I guess, in a way, is that certainly in the world I live in, the big corporates are increasingly recognizing that they can't generate the innovation internally that they need for the future, and they're increasingly externalizing their R&D. And therefore, they've got antennae out there constantly searching for the new things, and they have corporate venture capital, they have business development scouts, and then increasingly accelerators are just another mechanism of them accessing innovation. So I think all the time this trend of the big corporates externalizing their R&D and looking to bring in innovation, then accelerators have a future in some shape or form.
Niall?
We don't limit it to just accelerators. Like, we have an innovation section of the company as well. So Alpha is our one, and basically they do moonshots, as big as they get. And Telefonica says, here's a blank check, get it done, or try and get it done. So there's a number of, they're not many, but there's a few projects that are always ongoing through that. For 20 years' time, I'm sorry, that's going to be, a glass bowl in the middle of the table, and I'll pretend I know what I'm talking about. I do think there's always going to be a need to facilitate the change from academia into corporate life. And one of the largest things that I noticed, and I remember trying to get a job, was you may be academically off the charts, but a lot of corporates will look for experience as well. And I think the facilitation of an innovation space, whether that's through acceleration or through corporate partnerships in a space, will allow that, because then you can show there's a corporate experience element to people transitioning from one to the other. And I think that's why it would be important. Whether it's there in 20 years' time and somebody's found a cleverer way to do it, great. But if it isn't, I think that should be kind of something that's always kept in mind when people go through academia.
What 20 years, I think it's a long time when you look at certain technologies, but when you look at the trends, 100 years ago, states or governments, societies were investing tax money into research. This is still there. And this trend for higher acceleration of everything is also there. It means agility and acceleration is a threat for all companies, for all players. And if you put just those, and technologies will always follow their own trajectory of implementation, even in 100 years or 1,000 years. A certain technology needs a certain time. And nobody knows. It's a ball. You don't know when this time opens up, etc. So under this constraints, accelerators have always an opportunity. I would say, it's a hypothesis, but I'd say, yes, we need accelerators, and we will have more there.
So let me ask the related question, which is not what you think is going to happen, but what would you like to see happen? For example, in terms of, you usually start out with everybody doing their own thing and then segmentation of the market and very focused little things, and then people begin to realize that actually it's about multidisciplinary and larger groups coming together, ecosystems of accelerators. Is there trends in that spectrum? And I suppose across Europe, there's the perspective of can we get the investment to flow across Europe? Can we get the startups to immediately think about Europe as a market? Where do you see the evolution in that kind of perspective, and what kind of recommendations would you have for policymakers to improve the aspect of accelerators in the innovation ecosystem?
I think for policymakers, I'd say keep funding the institutional launchpad locations that corporates can come in, and that there's, there is trickle back. Because if you fund this, the innovators of tomorrow will be paying the taxes of tomorrow. So that's important. I think for startup companies and companies that are growing, make sure you incentivize them and give them opportunities to use the cash flow at the early stages to grow. That's important too. For corporates, me being a lawyer should have no tax. But what are you asking? No, I think honestly, I think that it's important for corporates to engage with policymakers to make sure that everything's done constructively in the right way. Social responsibility is so important. Innovation, there's a big push for social responsibility technology as well, but corporates have to keep that in mind at all times as well. We're not just a company, we're persons. We have people who have children, we have families, we've got every other aspect of life. It is important to make sure you can stand behind things and you can tell your family when you get home you've done something, So I think knitting that together with your corporate responsibility of answering to your shareholders is very important. But there's just a very clear balance that must be struck at all times, I think.
Tony, in terms of policymakers and the pan-European thing, what's your perspective?
I'm not sure about the pan-European, whether I can comment on that, but certainly policymakers, I completely agree with what you just said in terms of funding these propositions within the university academic environment is a long-term thing that requires government and university intervention to do it. And the reason they're doing it is not to line the pockets of industry with products for the future. They're doing it to change the culture of the students, to arm them with entrepreneurial skills and the postdocs, to make them more employable, and to help transition ideas out of the research base for the benefits of patients and society. And they're doing it for all those reasons. And the end result is that is that new innovations arise that corporates can then lock on to engage and get what they want out of it. But they must remember the reasons they're doing it. And certainly what we've seen is that requires a very long-term commitment. You can't just do this for a few years, step back and expect it to be sustainable. It requires a 20-year plus type commitment.
Very good.
That's interesting. You were talking about being from a pharma and a biotech sector. It's in medtech sector, it's 10 to 20 years, it's 20 to 30 years. So it has to be long-term. I think it's probably 15 years or more. I sat, on the American Chamber here advising with Forfis, the government, on what we do to, open things up. I think, collaboration, we're talking about the 3 or 4 different businesses, or corporate, small or large. We're talking about, the universities, and we're talking about the entities in between. We did look at other models whereby, there was sort of a centralization, that, everybody was invested, if we call it, in a central body that allowed, more flow and more open doors from one to the next. And the fact that we're discussing this topic now means that the doors aren't quite as open as we'd like them to be. So I'd love to see something like that. I have a question for the audience.
Yeah.
How many people here from an SME background originally or have been in that sector? And how many have been in a corporate sector prior? Okay, a mix. So we've got 50-50 that have been in corporate or SME, and maybe 50 that have been, maybe not been. So it's interesting. I think that, you know, and the panelists are all from varied backgrounds with understandings from all angles. And I think that's important. And to some of the questions around placing people in a different environment, I think that's important as well, so that you see it from the other perspective, and you get embedded in the culture and the understanding that the other potential partners and whatnot have. So that's another thing that I feel is really important.
Very good. Did you have anything else to add on the policy aspect, or how things should evolve, how you'd like to see things evolve?
I think,
Stefan?
I mean, policymakers have to play again and again and again with technology transfer vehicles, whatever they have. Technology transfer is not old. It's a young thing. It's a little baby in the world of technology. It's 20, 30 years, not 50 or 100. So I think we have to gamble around and find new ways all the time, new ways of accelerating from all sides. It's a transfer thing. A transfer needs involvement, and policy gives involvement, marketplaces support them.
Yeah, very good. Any other questions? Questions? Hands popping up all over the place. Don't know where to start. Questions? What about, like, can I ask you, while we're waiting for a question there, ask you about, for a company or for a startup, the recommendations and the advice that you would give them if they have a choice between going into a corporate-sponsored accelerator or a kind of independent accelerator, recognizing the kind of investments that they're going to want and probably institutional investments. What kind of advice would you have around that? Start with you, Tony, on that.
Well, at the risk of incurring the wrath of colleagues sitting around me, I guess our experience with the corporate accelerators, as I said at the beginning, has been there's not been a high conversion rate of the companies. Universities act as sort of pre-accelerators, and then people tend to be accelerator tourists. They then move into a corporate accelerator to get access. And maybe it's the expectation setting. Is the reason they are doing that is they're hopeful that corporate partner can act as a launch customer for them, provide access to the massive corporate resources, the understanding of the market. But actually the experience doesn't always pan out that way. And we've had a number of our companies have gone into corporate accelerators, but they haven't managed to make that uptake and conversion into a corporate product, probably for very good reasons once they've got in there. So I would be cautious about seeing this as the panacea answer to all your questions, and just see it as another route to gain market intelligence. And it may be that it doesn't work with that corporate partner, and you look to move on with someone else. We had one company that had a great success. They're called Uhu. They make these little globules that that they're edible water bottles with an algae coat. And they went into the Sky TV accelerator, who used their massive marketing and PR muscle to get them advertised, and they're now going to be picked up by the London Marathon and things like that, so you can sort of eat this water globule as you run around the marathon. So there was a good example of a corporate accelerator working really well, but there are also some bad examples.
Angela?
Yeah, so we're I suppose, corporate-based, and I think that there are gaps there in terms of, you know, being able to access people as quickly. So a lot of effort is required to get to the right people, as we're talking about. And I think some of the you know, tech-based accelerators, and we're tech-based, that have access to customers or potential customers seem to get on. I mean, they're very much enabled by, you know, having a direct connection. So they feel like they're making progress, but it's interesting that maybe it doesn't translate into that. I suppose one of the advantages of being, you know, broad and not having a particular affiliation is that there's more opportunity, and you're not, you know, siloed in a particular way, or you have to work with a particular customer. So maybe you kind of protect the opportunity in some way by being agnostic and being able to apply. But, you know, the struggle is always there, engaging the customer and engaging the potential partners. That said, I think there's a number of successes. You know, we have Vodafone partnerships, and 2 or more of our teams are working with them. We have SAP and Equi Ratings. We have a number of others, with Bank of Ireland and others, and AIB. We have Tandem and ABN, APRO. So we have a lot of engagement with corporates, I have to say, and we're not affiliated in particular with any group. So it is successful, but harder work.
Thanks. And Stefan, from your perspective, as an entrepreneur coming through, did you have the corporate experience or the non-corporate accelerator, or did you have an accelerator at all?
I have both, and everything has its own right. I think as an entrepreneur, I would look at first on my startup. What is the timeline I expect the technology or the startup to succeed? And then I would make a decision in which accelerator I would apply. For longer distance, I would go with corporates, actually. But if I need first seed and seed phase or early phase, I would probably go and prefer university accelerators.
Very good. And Niall, you got a comment on that? Now you have both the Wire own brand kind of corporate, but also have the partnership with the University of Edinburgh. So you do see two models to some extent.
Yeah, and to speak openly, we've only started the partnership, so we're still early doors working with Edinburgh, and it's been very successful, don't get me wrong, but we're learning and we're getting, so I can't really speak too much as an old hand on that. For me, I think it's about making sure it's right for both sides at that stage. So is it right for the startup? Are they going to see the benefit that they are looking for without giving away, if possible, because they don't want to give away equity? So it might be, if they're more suitable to be in a pre-acceleration location until they're at the stage where they believe it's a better fit to do it. So there's a balancing act there. And I think just generally, from our perspective, it's about making sure that we believe that we can actually do something with them, because we don't want to be just a churn of startups coming through and say, hey, you were part of Telefónica's Wire experience, now good luck, off you go into the fields and hope you do great. We want to make sure that there's actually an appetite. You can't guarantee it though, that's the problem. You can never guarantee that somebody's going to get a contract, but you can do your best to understand that there's a high likelihood, or there's a percentage likelihood above normal that they will, and you inform them of that as well, so that they can judge whether it's the right fit or not. And if you approach it that way, from me, if I approach it that way, or for my boss, Gary Stewart, who's the head of Wire in the UK, he approaches it that way. Is it right for both sides? Does it make sense? Is everybody getting on, and is there going to be a good relationship? Particularly if you're going to be investing in them, you become part of their family nearly because you're a shareholder. So it has to be right. And I think that's the key.
Very good. Okay, thank you very much. Oh, sorry, last question. We'll give one last question. Last question.
Thanks. Particularly, I guess, for Wire, do you take some of your corporate, you mentioned that you've got an internal innovation arm and it's creating things. Do they end up going into your accelerator programs as well?
Do you mean when I was talking about Alpha?
Yes.
Oh, right. No, they're not really separate and distinct startups. They're actually internal projects that are moonshots, that they just go and they say, well, how can we build this? How do we get everybody who's the right, and just get it all behind it and make it. I'm to be quite frank, I don't have all the details on the section. I just know that it is there. It's worked on a number of projects. I've seen some briefings on stuff they're doing, such as bringing internet to certain parts of South America, and they're doing it for free. Working with the local government in the area that they were talking about. If you contact me afterwards, I'll send you some details on it, Tom, if you wouldn't mind, or whoever can pass on my details to you, and I can find out a little bit more. But that's an internal innovation section, and I suppose the vehicle is different. So Wire is about acceleration of external third parties who have their own IP and their own companies, bringing them in and working with them and seeing if the innovation works well with Telefónica and will help us to get better. Whereas Alpha is about creating the project from scratch.
Very good. Thanks very much, Niall. Thank the panel for their great conversation. Thank you. I think we're at a coffee break.